when I look into the civil rights movement, for all of the good that I think it did, it also kind of made us to be seen as like this lower class.
If we weren't living in the same neighborhoods as our white counterparts, if we weren't having the same protections as our white counterparts, if we weren't even allowed to ride the same trains as our white counterparts, we weren't allowed to get education like our white counterparts, the systems that the government made in order to help us develop homes wasn't equally applied like our white counterparts. So in all of these aspects, we were not integrated into becoming Americans.
I mean, this isn't necessarily happening because these people are black. This is happening because these people don't have proper financial education or don't have proper history.
Look, the point of this conversation, we're going to be talking about black issues, specifically,
Sure.
I think we said reparations, the state of black America today, and systemic oppression. Those would be those three
Sure.
things. And I think all of those things tie in any given conversation anyway, right? Like talking about reparations without talking about systemic oppression is stupid. Talking about reparations without the state of black America today is really, really dumb. And I think even if you get really into the nitty gritty about systemic oppression, I feel like it necessarily goes towards reparations anyway. At least I think if you follow it to its end. So I guess
Interesting.
that's my opinion. I'm pretty sure you can push back against that as a libertarian.
Okay.
So I mean, I guess at a very base level, do you believe that systemic oppression exists?
Depends on how you describe it. I think there are a lot of racist people out of there, and I think there are like tremendous instances where you can bring up that black people have are going to face something that's unfair. Now, I've always kind of had this mentality that like we are all going to have some kind of hardship in our lives, and I think this sort of like radical belief that we should fundamentally change the country is a bit misplaced. Are there policies that I think that could be enacted that could help things? Absolutely. But I don't necessarily think they should fundamentally change the structure of America.
I would also agree with you that we probably shouldn't fundamentally change the structure of America. I think, I think this country is the best country in the world. So obviously that's going to be based off of its fundamentals. But I think you can come to a point where you realize that despite the fundamentals that have generated all of these insane amounts of opportunity, like there are an entire class of people, an entire race of people who have been largely systematically and intentionally left out of all of those opportunities, or the majority of them. So then it's like, while I wouldn't want to change those fundamentals, I would want to expand those fundamentals to make sure that they're fairly extended towards black citizens who have been largely denied.
Yeah, I can see that perspective. One thing I've always thought is really interesting, is especially as a black American myself. And okay, so we kind of first met, I don't know if you were there. So I said this one thing, which was I was told from a young age that I would have all this discrimination against me. And like, I largely found it to be untrue. In fact, what I actually found is like, I had a lot of stuff going for me. Right? I had a lot of support. So, for example, we have the HBCU system. I don't know how many historically black colleges there are. I think
there's a lot.
I know Booker T. Washington started like 100, but I don't know if there's still 100, if it's gone up or gone down, right? But we have entire colleges that are designed for success. There's so many scholarships you got. I actually got a scholarship myself for being black, and it eventually became the only scholarship I got. There are like groups that are out there. So I'm like, I mean, yeah, you can say that, but it's like, man, there's just so much out there, and it's like, do we need more of it? Like, I don't really think so. Like,
okay, well, let's get into that. I mean, so you talked about the fact that HBCUs exist in this country, and HBCUs are specifically like aimed at giving opportunity to black people. But then, I mean, I guess we have to think about why those HBCUs exist in the first place. And in reality, those HBCUs were literally created because we were literally denied education. And then you have to consider the fact that education used to be free, like college and things like that was free until black people started being able to attend it. And then at that point, then they decided, now we're going to start charging some fees. once niggas could get in there to largely keep us out. And then they finally were like, hey, we need to create separate institutions altogether to permit Black people to be able to go to school. So I would say the existence of the HBCUs is indicative of an entire generation of people that prior to their existence were being denied. And then we also have to recognize that even once the HBCUs were created, it wasn't like that they had the same amount of financial opportunities as their white counterparts and the other established state-funded universities. Like now, of course, yes, you get really great education at those universities, but we have to realize this is many, many years down the line, but there are people that are alive today. It should be our parents, or for you, I don't know your age, but at the most your grandparents who were denied some of these opportunities and had to go to these things where sometimes it used to be subpar and things like that in order to get those things. And then furthermore, the thing that you mentioned, that you got a scholarship for being Black, and that ended up being your only scholarship. And I think that's even more poignant, right? Because that's another example of where you needed that scholarship for being Black because you weren't able to get, or maybe were denied some of the other scholarships. And there have already been clear examples of like racialized discrimination when it comes to scholarships for Black people, which is why we need those sorts of things in order to offset the damages caused by that type of discrimination.
Well, in that situation, I just eventually they reassessed like the incomes of my parents, and they found out. So I got the first scholarship financially. They just found out I didn't need financial aid. And that's why, so I certainly didn't need the scholarship to go to college. I took out a student loan. My parents paid for part of it. I actually eventually went to a grad school, and grad school's free. Although it's funny, I actually got more money from the grad school for being Black than I did undergrad, because I was one of the few Black people to get into that grad school, like ever. So they just had that money there. They just didn't know what to do with it.
That's awesome.
I think, yeah, it makes me feel really bad about failing out, though.
Well, I mean,
was that was my stupidity, you know.
Sure.
Okay, but the thing about HBUs I think is interesting, because my understanding was a lot of them were tied to some of the work of Booker T. Washington, who, if I recall correctly, I'm trying to do this without looking him up, but if you look him up, you'll find out that he was part of, I know, at least one organization that was designed for the advancement of the education of African Americans, because during that time, like Black people, there definitely was an education gap. There's both an education and an income gap, and it was like his earnest desire that Black people get not only just like high, kind of like falutin educational skills, but also, you know, meaningful, almost kind of like skilled labor type of knowledge that he felt could have been applied, which is why I tend to find myself as a Booker T. Washington fan over like a W.E.B. Du Bois fan, who's like more of like a much more of a scholar, and like kind of, I don't know, I'd probably say W.E.B. Du Bois would probably be someone we'd probably see him on like MSNBC or something, talking about like discussing critical theory or something. So, but I don't know, like the fact that they've been in positions for like over 100 years, it's like we've had this thing, and they were incredibly effective. So, like, one piece of data I do have is that if you look at the Black-white wealth ratio, the largest period that it reduced was right after the Civil War, and this reduction continued into the 1920s. So it's like there's this narrative that, like, you know, we had this massive, you know, Jim Crow era of like racial suppression, but during this era, Black people were also succeeding. It was only until like the 1960s and like the 1970s that stopped.
Wait, what do you mean? So the Black people were succeeding. Some Black people were succeeding, but the wealth gap was still pretty enormous. And like, you have to recognize that like even prior to the 1960s, like, yeah, there was an insane wealth gap. So I mean, you can say some Black people succeeded, but overall, Black people were not succeeding at the same rates as their white counterparts. They weren't they didn't have the same income as their white counterparts. They weren't generating the same wealth as their white counterparts. They weren't getting the same education as their white counterparts. So when you can say we're succeeding, what's your standard for success? Shouldn't it be the standard, like compared to the average American? And if we took the average white American, we can see that there were great, like crazy differences.
Yeah. So you would think that, I mean, think about the state of Black America post-slavery, right? This was I think it was about 3 million slaves or 3 or 4 million slaves during this time. So this is around 3 or 4 million people. I want to say it's 10% of the population. I know that's the current number. Completely uneducated, zero history of, like, completely cut off from their past.
Title
right?
debate
Zero
with
history
Elliot the
of
Lancer.
families with job skills, literacy rates that were extremely low. I mean, I think it was illegal for Black people to read at one point in time. And very shortly after this, you saw that a lot of these trends just reversed massively, right? Like we had like from 1860 to like 1900, there was just a large rate of Black people learning skills, a large rate becoming literate. I think there's some quotes about this that said like the reduction in literacy rates among Black people was astounding, which, you know, I think that just, you know, is a testament to our skills at the time, right? And one thing I find really interesting is if you go like to the Wikipedia article for Black businesses, it will state that the golden age of Black business was during the early 1900s. So from 1900 to about 1920, the number of Black businesses doubled. So like Black people were getting in like all of these fields, like being shoemakers and watchmakers and, you know, skilled trades and like independent contractors. And that's what I mean by succeeding. I mean by, like, you know, going from having nothing to actually integrating with society and making like a meaningful contribution.
Well, sure, but just to be clear, like obviously, like the rate of change is going to be dramatic when you start out at incredibly low numbers. For example, to increase from 1% to 10% is an increase of like 1,000%. It's 1,000% change, right? But then obviously to change from something to like 50%, is it not?
It's 10% change.
No.
I know what you're saying. It's a 10 times change.
Right. So 10 times is equivalent to 1,000%, right? Whereas if you're looking at something like if you're trying to go from 50% to 75% change, it's only a 50% change, even though it's like you're getting a 25% difference, but it's like the percentage change is only 25%, right? Or 50%, I'm sorry. So then in that case, like when you start looking at that thing, of course you're going to see dramatic changes like upon emancipation. So you'll see like, yes, Black literacy rates, because of like the laws and things that prevented Black people from receiving education, you can say there's an explosion. But the explosion still didn't give them net the same results as white people, right? They still didn't have the same literacy rates as their white counterparts. But yes, there's an explosion because there was almost no literacy rates before because of all of the systemic barriers that were in place, right? So then just looking at that explosion, but not looking at the comparison, again, to the American dream and the white whole doesn't make sense. Likewise, when we're talking about these Black changes, right? This explosion of Black businesses. Sure, you have these newly emancipated Black people who are able to create their own businesses and things like that. So yes, they have something. There's going to be a great amount of them that are going to try to find something to do with themselves. And so you're going to see these crazy changes. But again, you're not going to see them be able to generate the same wealth and so on and so forth, which takes us back to from emancipation all the way until like the 60s, as you were talking about, there were still insane gaps that have never disappeared in wealth, in education, and income. All of those things have never, ever, ever been like fixed. So like simply pointing out, hey, but here was a great explosion doesn't actually address the original concern.
No, I agree. Actually, in fact, and for this reason, one of the things I find myself most fascinated with is why did this reduction in the gap end? So if you look at the graph, it's easy to find. You just Google it, right? It's essentially it has a horizontal asymptote to it, right? So it kind of, you know, there's this massive reduction in the wealth ratio, and then you hit to like 1960 to present day, right? And it's just a straight line. And I've always found that like really fascinating. Like, what has been going on this whole time? And there are a lot of theories. I'm sorry.
Can you find one of those graphs? Because I'm not familiar with what exactly you're referring to.
I have it open.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You can just search Black white wealth ratio, and Black white wealth ratio. Okay. Yeah. So the one I'm referring to specifically comes from the NBER, or the National Bureau of Economic Research. Where should I post it?
You can directly message it to me. You can post it inside of the Discord, like in the general chat.
Okay.
Anyway, tell me which one you do.
and even they note this. I DM'd you.
Okay, perfect.
And they note this, that like the pace of, so they say the pace of racial wealth convergence increased between no, what is there? So they, okay, so here's something they say interesting. The racial wealth gap has actually widened in the past 4 decades, right? There is a slowdown in black wages from the 1940. From 1950 to 1980, there was no difference between blacks and whites in accruing capital gains. And they said since 1980, whites have accrued on average 0.65% points more. Okay, that's
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You can go. So the one thing I think really is very fascinating about this is that, like, we normally think about the 60s as this period of this wonderful, this great time for black people, right? Because that's when the Civil Rights Act. Well, that's sort of the common narrative. Like, the common narrative is that America.
I don't have that narrative.
Do you disagree?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
I think it's insane to say that this was a great period for America, the 1958 or during the Civil Rights Act, when you literally have black people being hosed down. They're literally marching on Washington, looking for jobs and freedom and asking for an end to police brutality. Sure, it was a great awakening for black people, for us to unify and to speak our truths to the government. But it couldn't have been a good time for us to sit here and be complaining literally to the government that, hey, you guys are still discriminating against us. Meanwhile, you have the political leaders of this same time literally being assassinated. I mean, Martin Luther King was assassinated 3 years after the original Civil Rights Act, and then 1 year before the Fair Housing Act. I mean, the long hot summer of 1967 was a time of insane amounts of turmoil where black people were uprising because of the increase and incessant discrimination against them. I don't know who can look at any time in the 60s whatsoever and see that as a great time. Was it at least a time of political awareness and political voicings? Sure. But as far as wealth, again, education, jobs, and income, this was not a great time for black Americans. And we haven't seen a great time before then until now. So no, I can't see that idea. I don't know who would have that narrative. Anyone having that narrative is really short-sighted. Secondly, when we're looking at this graph right here that you presented to me, of course, this literally speaks to my point that yes, in 1860, shortly after the emancipation and things like that, you see this crazy decrease in the white to black wealth, right? Because black people are coming from literally zero wealth. So any increase in that, you're going to see dramatic changes. But of course, now in order to get big changes, there's going to have to be other steps, right? And there were limits to the amount of gains, right? I guess some people could call that diminishing returns. And so then we have to start figuring out, okay, what stopped it at that point? Obviously, going from zero to whatever we were getting, which was still going to be significantly lower income, yes, that would still result in these drastic changes to the graph. But then to get from lower middle class or lower class to get towards middle class and even upper middle class is going to take some other changes. And we've never seen those changes, such that black people still are hyper overrepresented within the poverty classes of America today. This graph literally more talks to the idea that there still hasn't been enough done.
Yeah, so maybe we actually probably agree partially on some things, which is that I think the narrative about the civil rights movement is probably a bit misunderstood. I get the feeling we probably disagree for different reasons, though.
Okay, let me hear your reasons.
One of my disagreement is that, when I look into who was powering the civil rights movement, it was largely kind of proto-Marxist movement, right? It was this movement that stated that for all of the good that I think it did in trying to establish the consciousness of trying to see beyond race, it also kind of angered black Americans and made them made us to be seen as this lower class. And I've always thought that kind of belief is somewhat self-fulfilling. And I think that's part of the reason why things haven't improved, especially economically. Right, when you have a group of people, so Black America before the 1960s, I think we were largely interested in just integrating and kind of becoming Americans. A really good example of this was the name thing. So actually, I did some research about this, and from the end of the Civil War to before 1960s, African Americans just took American names. We kept our slave names, which were the same as other white Americans because they were the names of our slave owners. And we also, when we would be born, we would adopt new names that were also similar to most other Americans. And then during the 1960s and 70s, there's this rebirth. You kind of saw where we kind of made these, we essentially invented these names that were like pseudo pan African and like created this new sense of identity. And it's like, it's what I think was intended to be this ethnic identity became like a class identity. And it became this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that aspect of what I think happened to Black culture, I think that has probably hurt us more than it's helped us.
Okay, well, there's a few things there that I'm gonna have to obviously disagreeing with, right? Like you said, the civil rights made us seem like a lower class. I don't think the civil rights made us seem like a lower class. The civil rights correctly identified the state of Black Americans as still being significantly more likely to be unemployed, still not having the same education opportunities. Literally, we couldn't go to the same schools in some places. Literally having discrimination against us within jobs and things like that, so that we're not able to get better incomes. So all of the things that made people American, that was like one of the major signs that was held up, was specifically saying we won't be second class citizens. It's not that they were making us seem like second class citizens. All of those opportunities had been denied to us, so it just accurately pointed it out. It's like almost like you're looking at an injustice that's occurring and then calling the person who identifies and voices that injustice as if they're painting us that way, when in reality they were just correctly identifying it, because obviously the first step in fixing something is to identify it. Then the other thing you said, like Black Americans were largely integrated into becoming Americans. How can you say that when my father during that same period couldn't even drink from the same fountains as his white counterparts, or like he couldn't go to the same school as his white counterparts? No, that wouldn't mean that we wasn't integrated in Americans. He was integrated into second-class citizenship, where his schools were underfunded, the education was poor, the job opportunities were poor, and like he literally couldn't ride the same bus as other people, couldn't drink from the same fountains, couldn't use the same restroom, and the restrooms that they had to use were obviously inferior. The fountains they had to drink from were obviously like disgusting, and no one wanted to drink from them. So that's not what it felt like to be an American. Hell, half of them didn't even get a right to vote, which is obviously one of the most great American franchises, because that's how you shape the country. So I don't know how we were largely integrated. I would need you to identify that and a few other things. I mean, two other things you said. Sure. You were talking about the Black sounding names, right? And like, sure, like there was afterwards like the identity of recognizing that Blackness, that people wanting to establish a separate identity and wanting to like collectivize in that way. That's fine, but it's hard for me to entertain a conversation where we're shifting the conversation from the fundamentals of America, which is a capitalist system, which is a beautiful system, but the fundamentals of that system, the fundamentals of capitalism, is going to be shaped around home ownership, shaped around wealth, right? And Black people were being denied home loans and they weren't able to get wealth or income. So then it seems like largely like the fundamentals of America, they weren't there. So I feel like it's kind of silly to talk about name changes like in response to that. And then secondly, our ethnic identity has always been like somewhat like the ethnic identity and the class identity have to be interchanged, because clearly like a lot of the class and economics were shaped around that. Like specifically, we won't let you buy a house because you're Black, which is going to change your class. We won't let you work this job because you're Black, which is going to change your class. We won't let you live in this neighborhood because you're Black, which is going to inform your class. So in reality, I don't think the civil rights painted us in this way. The civil rights gave us awareness of an ongoing problem and the need for it to change. Now, that's a whole lot, and I was only just responding to all the things you said. If you want me to go through any one of those individually, I just took down notes as you were talking.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I want to talk about the Black home ownership thing, but I want to table that.
Okay.
I think maybe you. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to explore and parse what I said. So there are arguably kind of like multiple things that happened during the civil rights movement. I think some were good, some were bad. I think some of the legal steps towards equality of opportunity were very good, although. When I look into that, one thing I found really interesting is that those had already been in place. So are you familiar with like the Little Rock Nine and like the integration, with Brown versus Board of Education?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I had a painting of that in the house I grew up with. Right, that wasn't a law. That was actually a Supreme Court decision. That the framework to have equality under the law. So like the Little Rock Nine was integrated as part of a Supreme Court decision, right?
Yes,
Brown v. Board of Education.
But that obviously like is like Supreme Court. They're part of the, what do we call that? The judicial, like
the judicial branch,
right? And so the judicial branch is what creates the laws.
Like, the Congress, the legislative branch creates the laws.
Sure, but
the judicial branch interprets the law.
Right. So I mean, there you go. Sure. So I mean, so in that sense, then that goes ahead and they're interpreting a law and challenging a law, and they set precedent, and then basically say what laws you can't do. For example, the Supreme Court can say, like, this is constitutional, and so as a result of this, then now this informs every law that's going forth. So then, in the same sense, while it might not be a law specifically written, it is definitely a codification that informs the law.
It's case law. It's case.
So, I mean, I feel like we're going to get that specific. Like, it's clearly a legal precedent.
Yeah, well, but one thing I find really fascinating about this is that the constitutional amendment that was invoked for Brown v. Board of Education. By the way, someone fact check me if it really was Brown v. Board of Education that was responsible for the Little Rock Nine, but still kind of the same thing. Like, Brown v. Board of Education established that we should integrate our schools. Furthermore, but I think the more important thing that it did was it established the precedence of the 14th Amendment, right? Which is the 14th Amendment is the one that gives equal protection for all citizens of the United States. Essentially, if you're a citizen of the United States, regardless of your race or whatever, every law ought to apply to you equally, right? Mm-hmm. That law that amendment had been in place for since the 1860s, right? Well, that amendment came in place after the end of the Civil War. So
absolutely.
It's like,
but hold on. But if these amendments are in place, and the government said from the very beginning that all men were created equal, but then you need a Supreme Court obviously to enforce these decisions, because clearly you can have hypocrisy. And so to say all men are created equal, but we can't educate our black citizens, or black citizens don't have a right to vote, or so on and so forth, is clearly indicative of the fact that you don't think that they're actually equal. So in the same sense, yes, the 14th Amendment did exist, but it was under that scope. They still felt that it was okay to not actually equally apply it, which is why the Supreme Court comes in and starts painting it in a different way, informing the way we interpret it to mean that it has to be equal in this way. So simply saying it existed, but we can obviously see that it wasn't applied fairly, that doesn't really mean anything, right? Like, the Supreme Court is what gave the precedent, which is why I said it's legal precedent, to be able to say, hey, you can't discriminate in this way. So simply pointing back to the origins of the 14th Amendment is really, really, really dismissive of the actual precedent that came through the Brown versus Board of Education.
I mean, like I said, libertarian in me wants to say, well, this is the problem with the inefficiency of the government legislative system, right?
I'm not going there. I'm sorry.
You create a law. I know, but but I think the important thing though is that we had I would actually argue we had a legal precedent for both emancipation of the black people and to be treated as equals under the law since the country was founded, and. It was but the meaningful thing that I find is that, that part of the Constitution said Black Americans were Americans to be given the same protection of the government since the 1800s.
But it didn't happen, though.
It didn't happen, right? Because of how laws applied.
No, well, okay. So again, I feel like we're look, at the
end Can I point out something?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, there are actually laws in certain states today that violate the 14th Amendment.
Sure, but
it's cringy as fuck, right? Like, there's some laws in Alabama that says black people can't vote. That's actually not violating the 14th Amendment. That violates another amendment. But
sure, but I think that's exactly my point.
It's understood that it's unconstitutional. They don't. Yeah.
Right. So
nobody follows it. That's what I mean.
When you can't legally follow it, and I think that's exactly my point. It's because what you're talking about is hey, the law said this thing, the Constitution said this thing, but we obviously know they didn't interpret it that way, such that it would apply to us. Because what matters more, it doesn't matter what the law says. It matters how it's interpreted and how it's applied. So if we say, yes, everyone is equal, while simultaneously saying separate is equal, while simultaneously saying discrimination is legal, while simultaneously saying, blacks and whites can't marry, and all of those kinds of things, legally allowing you to discriminate, then at that point, then you understand that regardless of whatever you said in your words, there's great hypocrisy happening and these things aren't being applied. So I feel like it's almost disingenuous, and I'm not trying to accuse you of being disingenuous, but it feels almost like we're intentionally turning a blind eye to the actual way that everything was applied in this country, to go back and say, well, since the beginning of the Constitution, we said all men were created equal. and then we ignore literally all instances of discrimination and harmful practices against Black people, especially in a conversation where that's the subject of discussion. It feels like, wait, are we just going to ignore all of that history just to be able to say, well, you know, it was kind of equal? That doesn't sound right.
No, but I mean, I guess I have to be a libertarian again and say, I mean, this is one of the faults in having a legal system.
Sure. Wait, no.
Not that it's saying I'm
Whether you say it's a fault of having a legal system or not, it doesn't change the fact that we do have the legal system. And the conversation right now is about the legal system as it stands. Has it been oppressive to Black people? Was there a need for the civil rights movement, right? Because we could sit here and hypothesize about our dream world where there is no law, where everyone is equal, and there's no need for any Supreme Court decisions. And that's fine. We could, if we want to just kind of have that like philosophizing, dreaming, like staring up at clouds while we discuss these things. But right now we're talking about the history as it has been applied and the necessity of different movements that were needed to shape the country in order to rectify a lot of the injustices. And that's the Civil Rights Act was necessary for that purpose.
Well, okay, so I can't fully criticize the Civil Rights Act. I've heard some criticisms of it, but again, going back to legal system. Okay, so I want to point out, I don't hate the U.S. legal system, right? I think that it's there for a purpose. I actually think it's very well crafted, but legal systems are going to have inefficiencies, and sometimes those inefficiencies mean a law that's written in 1860 doesn't truly get like applied and interpreted properly until like 1930 or something, right? That's just because it takes a long time for these things to happen. You have to go through a certain process, right? If you want to try to enforce, for example, a constitution, you need to have like an existing law in place, and then a lawsuit gets brought up, and to that law, and then like the people have to be well funded enough to do a lawsuit against the Supreme Court. I mean, this is not a system that happens very quickly, but for good reason, because constructing a country is something that happens slowly, right? Like, for better or worse, it just is. Like, I don't think many countries have been built up very quickly that are leading examples of like ethics or economic prosperity or anything. They either draw on other countries or like the work that other countries have done, or they take a long time to build up. But that's actually even true of the United States, right? The United States, they looked at like the democracies in Europe and the democracies of the past, democracies of Greece, and they crafted a country based off of that. So it's like I can see that there is this. I can see that there's this feeling of disappointment within the federal government. Like it had an injustice that was applied over a very long period of time. But I think that is just part of the process, for better or worse. And that's why when I think of some of my prescriptions, they don't necessarily involve like tearing down vast swaths of the government or even fundamentally changing how we do things.
But I haven't introduced anything about.
Ironically, they do involve tearing down, but not the parts that other people want to tear down.
I'm not introducing the idea of like tearing down the government. I think you can reform things, and that's what this conversation has been about thus far from me. And furthermore, I think, again, like to refer to all of the egregious, widespread discrimination as an inefficiency of the law just seems kind of like ridiculous. It wasn't that it was being inefficient. It was intentional. They created these laws to discriminate, and they successfully and intentionally did it. So then it's not that the law was inefficient. The law was efficient in exacting the will of the people who wanted that discrimination to take place. They wanted it. It was what they envisioned, and it happened.
Yeah, okay. So when you're saying they created these laws to discriminate, are you talking about like some of the Jim Crow laws that were created?
Yeah, sure. I would say,
or the earlier constitutional laws.
I would say all of it. So yeah.
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to say that the Constitution was created to discriminate, because consider the position the founding fathers were when they created the country, right? They had a portion of the country that was heavily dependent on slavery at the time. More importantly, the people that were ruling the country were themselves slave owners. And while, you can read the Federalist Papers, and I've been meaning to do this, but like they recognized this was a bad thing. They recognized this was an evil, and they did not want to have it in the country. But it's like they were in this position of like, well, we can't have this other country be a slave country. Like we would rather the South be a part of America than, the South just like becoming a separate country and going to a civil war in like 1776.
So okay,
right? So they were fought up with a conundrum.
What you're doing is you're giving justification for their intention, which is a step past what I was saying, that their intention was to continue slavery. Now you might say maybe it was only a passive thing, only because they wanted to. Whatever. So on. What I don't care. What I'm saying is they intentionally included slavery and allowed for slavery and didn't stop it. So then that means from the very beginning, from the forming of this country, they intended that discrimination. Now you can say why? Maybe it was the South and they were dependent on, so whatever reasons you have. At the end of the day, then that means my point stands. They intended for that slavery. They wanted it and they allowed for it. And so the law exacted their will. So it was very efficient. They did not want to abolish slavery and the law wasn't doing what it did, whatever. They wanted that slavery and allowed for it. And it happened.
Of course, my understanding is slavery was only officially enumerated in the Constitution as a part of the Three-Fifths Clause.
No, well, listen, if you read the Federalist Papers or you see some of those letters and conversations that were happening from Thomas Jefferson and the other folks, you hear them specifically address the idea about slavery and whether or not they should continue it and so on and so forth. And there were great debates amongst them on whether or not to do that. And they, at the end of the day, decided rather than to include something like the abolishment of slavery or anything like that, they decided they decided not to get rid of that. They decided to like specifically mention certain laws.
That I will agree with.
Right. And so they specifically mentioned certain laws that like applied towards slaves that said things about like freed slaves not having the right to like not being free just because you escaped someone, right? Like in escaping to free states and things like that, which were literally upholding the system of slavery, preventing people from escaping to free states. That was in the Constitution, right? So then if that's the case...
No, that was implemented later.
Well,
like you had like the...
Here, someone just linked me Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1, right? Like if we can read that right now, like it was really...
Sure.
Okay, let's find it then. 1 second.
Because I remember that distinctly. I don't remember what exactly it was, but there was like an implementation where like at first slaves had to escape to the northern states. Then it was written that you had to return found slaves even if they were in free states. And then like that's when like the Underground Railroad continued all the way up to Canada.
Hold on, let me see. We'll find it real second.
I can try it. What was that? I think it was like the Slave Return Act.
Look, here it is, right here. I'll link it to you. Here, Article 1, Section 9,
Clause
1.
The Fugitive Slave Act. Okay,
yeah.
But what? Yeah.
Here, let me just link it to you. 1 second. Message. Why do I do that? Oh, no, I could do it from here. I'm sorry, wrong window. That's frustrating.
1 section.
Sorry about that. There we go. Let me see it. We should still have it. Okay. There we go. Sorry. From here, I should be able to message you. Paste. Boom. Okay. There we go.
Did you DM me or?
Yeah. Oh no, I put it in the chat. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Where's the chat?
It's in Discord, but
I don't.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay, I see. Okay,
okay.
The slave trade clause. Okay, what does this say? The common interpretation. Article 1 is one that in the original Constitution related to slavery, though, does not use the word slave. This clause prohibited from limiting the importation of persons where the existence of its allowed since there's I'm great on the approach. Does it seem odd? Wait. His message said, I congrat on the approach of the period at which you may interpose your blah, 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 to withdraw the citizen from all further in those violations of human rights which has been so long continued on the offending inhabitants in Africa. I'm not entirely sure this says...
Here, just read the very first paragraph.
It's one of the handful of provisions in the original Constitution relating to slavery, though it does not use the word slave. This clause prohibited the federal government from limiting the importation of persons, where the existing state government saw fit to allow it.
Wait. Persons keep reading, understood at the time to mean primarily enslaved African persons.
To mean primarily enslaved African persons, yeah.
Right. Keep going.
Yeah, it was a compromise between southern states where slavery was pivotal to the economy and states where the abolition of slavery had been accomplished.
You skipped again. Here. Persons understood at the time to mean primarily enslaved African persons, where the existing state government saw fit to allow it until some 20 years after the Constitution took effect. It was a compromise between southern states where slavery was pivotal to the economy and states where the abolition of slavery had been accomplished or was contemplated. So again, this is in the original Constitution, in which they are specifically saying that the federal government will not limit the ability for people, will not limit slaves, like their ability to import slavery. So here,
to import people, but
sure. Slaves. Well, obviously, at the time we knew that the people that they were importing were enslaved African Americans. So then clearly, this is again a perfect example from the original Constitution in which they 100% aware of slavery and chose to make sure that they were going to allow it by saying we're not going to forbid it, and we know that we're not going to limit it, and we know this thing is already in existence. Is definitely, if not tacit approval, just outright approval, right? So again, the Constitution. You can't call that an inefficiency of the Constitution. Thank you, by the way, Duck Slime. You can't call that an inefficiency of the Constitution. You have to call that the will of the government intentionally enacting this discrimination. So again, I feel like, and we've really strayed from all of the other points, but I feel like, again, to call it inefficiency when it's doing exactly what it's intended to do seems like a misnomer. But again, and so we never really fully. Go ahead.
Like the inefficiency I originally stated was that the 14th Amendment, while it was written, it certainly took several Supreme Court cases to fully apply it and to fully create a society where people were more equal in the eyes of the law. But that's how law is constructed. I mean, there is essentially, I think it's like statutory law and case law, right? Like you have laws that you have applications of the law that are understood as it's written. And then as you have court cases and you have states that make laws that are in violation of the Constitution, we find out how much those laws really extend, right?
But again, that's not an inefficiency of the law. If I make a law in my household and I say, everyone's going to be in bed by 8:30. Everyone's going to be in bed by 8:30. But then, my son keeps staying up past 8:30. And my daughter comes to me and asks me, wait a minute, this is unfair. You said everyone had to be in bed by 8:30. And I say, no, I meant it doesn't apply to boys. Only girls have to be in bed at 8:30. You can't say, when I come back later on and say, okay, that's not fair, that's discriminatory, and I'm going to say everyone has to be in bed at 8:30. You can't then say, oh, it just took a long time for me to enact it. When I am the power that be, and I have the ability to enforce it and interpret it in the way that I see fit, and I choose intentionally, and amongst a whole bevy of other laws, right, that to be able to say, no, it will only apply towards this person, then that's not an inefficiency of the law. It's at the time, my will was that my son didn't have to abide by the same will as my daughter. So then the law wasn't inefficient. The law did exactly what it was supposed to. I chose later on to then add on precedent through the Supreme Court or through whatever my wife and I come together and say, we're going to establish a precedent that this thing will not only apply towards women. So then you can't say that that's an inefficiency of the law. The law did what it was intended to do. They chose to discriminate. It was enacting my will because I continued to ensure that my daughter followed this rule while I didn't apply that towards my son. So in the same sense, when it comes to the government, you cannot say that it was an inefficiency. They literally intended for it to only apply towards American citizens, which Black people were largely not considered American at the time.
Yeah, or even people.
Well, by the time we got to emancipation, we were considered people. But at that point, all of these laws and interpretations were still intended to discriminate.
Yeah. It's they said, well, we say all men are created equal. I'm like, what about Black men? And well, they're not men, so they don't count. Yeah. Which again, what is a man?
Right. But then at this point, then we have to be able to say that the civil rights didn't make us seem like a lower class. We were actually second class citizens in the eyes of the law at that point, right?
Maybe. I mean, given that the 14th Amendment, Brown v. Board of Education had occurred many years before the actual Civil Rights Act happened, there's a lot of work to make sure that Black Americans were seen as equals in the eyes of the law.
Well, we were constantly working at it, but you can't sit there and you can't go back to small victories in the 50s and things like that and say, well, see, there was still like we were still seeing them as equal, right? Like, because clearly, again, the Fair Housing Act didn't pass until 1968. Up to that point, you were legally allowed to make sure that people weren't able to live in your neighborhoods until 1964. I mean until 1968, and then 1968, right? And then let's not act like the Supreme, like just simply the Brown versus Board of Education passing in 1954 immediately fixed the problem. We had a second one, right? Brown versus Board of Education 2. Number 2, right, where the Supreme Court ruled, hey, you guys got to make sure that you guys implement these things with due diligence. And we saw that just simply changing that law didn't fix anything. Even still, in the places where they were intentionally trying to make sure that it was fixed, they literally went to those people and said, we had to escort them into these schools with the National Guard because people said specifically, we won't do it. Then on top of that, then you have all of these states that decided to start creating all of these what do you call it? Whites only private schools, right? Where you had school boards who would like decide how to zone people. And so this discrimination continued well past 1968. In the 80s, there were still areas in the South in which black people, like 90% of black children were still in segregated blacks only school, even though it wasn't like it was a de facto discrimination.
So it was de facto discrimination.
Right. So then my point being, if that's the case, you cannot say simply, well, hey, we've already fixed the problem in 1954 when the problem was ongoing into 1980. And again, some of the issues that we were specifically addressing in the late 1960s still hadn't been fixed and still haven't been fully rectified now. Like, no, we were not equal under the law, under no circumstances, if we just look at the application and the status of black Americans during that time.
Well, I mean, but here's the question. What is the law? Right? I mean, if you're going, the question is, what is the law, right? So if you're going to state that, like, the law, or certainly being equal under the law is every law having an equal outcome, that's just not achievable.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that everyone needs to have an equal outcome. I'm saying they have to have equal opportunity, which we did not.
I agree. Okay. Yes. And then here comes the difficulty, right? So, I mean, if a law gets passed that is unconstitutional, is that can you say that the United States has a law that makes people equal under the law? Like, if it's written in the Constitution that all laws are to be applied equally, well, then one state decides to make a law where that's not the case. I mean, that's still true that all law, like it's still okay. Not only is it true that like that law doesn't necessarily make the United States not make people unequal to law, because in order for you to like nullify that law, you have to put it into a case. You have to appeal it under like 3 different court systems, and it's taken to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has to knock it down. Right? That's what I mean when I say the law is inefficient. And any state can do that, right? Like, you could have a state tomorrow that could say, "Oh yeah, like we want to make slavery legal again," and they're free to do that. But like that, if you want to stop that from happening, it's not going to happen when that law is created, right? It's going to happen when the law goes through the system and goes to the Supreme Court.
Sure. You look at
that's what I mean when I say like the law is inefficient.
Well, okay, I'm not. What I'm always going to be talking about is application of the law more so than I'm going to talk about like whether or not I like the way everything goes. Like, I'm talking about right now, because we're having 2 different conversations. I think you're talking about, when you're saying the law is inefficient, you're talking about like your dream world where we make the law into this better thing and how it should be. I'm talking about what historically has happened and what is currently happening. So So like in that concept where you have like a state, if you have a state that says, hey, like, okay, we're going to do this illegal thing, even though the federal law says all things have to be created equal, right? If that state actually applies its law and the federal government hasn't intervened yet, then I'm going to say that portion of the country is discriminatory. It is whatever. It'd be like the equivalent of like on my body. If my foot is gangrenous, that doesn't mean that my heart is. It doesn't mean that my brain is. But that portion of my body is sick. Now, I'm going to be, when I'm talking about me as a whole, if you ask me how am I, if even just my foot is gangrenous, then I'm going to say I am sick. I am dealing with this problem because it's affecting my body and my citizens. The government is made up of its citizens. The country is represented by its citizens and its laws. And so then if that's the case and you have portions of the government, now that doesn't say that the entire country is that, but this very vital, absolute portion of the country is absolutely sick, is absolutely discriminatory. And then what's really crazy about it is, again, when we're talking about the Supreme Court is the highest law. That is the overarching governing law. And the Supreme Court had made several racist statements, several racist precedent that allowed for this type of discrimination.
Oh, they did.
So then,
totally.
so then that means that we were not equal under the law.
Well, I mean, it depends on which law.
The highest law. I'm sorry, I'll say it this way. We were not equal under the highest, most overarching parts of the law.
In that case, I would disagree with you, right? Because there's so many examples of the 14th Amendment being applied that allowed American citizens, specifically Black citizens, to become more equal. So we were certainly more equal under the Constitution after the passage of the 14th Amendment. It's just due to the nature of how the Constitution works. That didn't necessarily mean that like all Black Americans became equal to Americans in like the grand scheme of like all aspects of the government. We weren't even legally equal. Correct, and I agree with you. I just want to point out, I think we have some different assumptions about government. Like I have this assumption that government, just by its very nature, efficient. That's like it's just a beast we got to deal with. I'm not fully ANCAP. I'd love to be, but like I definitely think we definitely need the government to do a lot of things. I think public good, public education is a good thing. I think national research is a good thing. I think certainly allowing for like a judicial system, allowing for contracts, allowing for property rights, even the military. I think those are all very good things. And this is going to require a large national government in order to ensure all of these things, right?
But right now, what you're doing is you're still doing that daydreaming thing, though, like about like our dream government. I don't want to have that conversation.
No. I'm talking about how the government currently exists.
Right, okay, so we're talking about how the government is and how it's been applied. I'm saying I'm being
a realist about the government.
No, we're talking about how the government is and how it has historically been applied. Not talking about what we would prefer or how we would like the government to work. We're talking about how it is and how it has been. So right now, because all of the statements you made, I took down notes for them. One of them, you said that civil rights made us seem like a lower class. That's talking about how the government was and what happened, right? Not about what we would prefer. Then the other thing you said, Black Americans. I wrote down these words verbatim. The other thing you said, Black Americans were largely integrated into becoming Americans. You said those words. And so it's like, no, we were not, right? Clearly, if we weren't living in the same neighborhoods as our white counterparts, if we weren't having the same protections as our white counterparts, if we weren't even allowed to ride the same trains as our white counterparts, we weren't allowed to get education like our white counterparts, the systems that the government made in order to help us develop homes wasn't equally applied like our white counterparts. So in all of these aspects, we were not integrated into becoming Americans.
I said we were being integrated, like it was a process, right? Going from
so it hadn't happened yet.
Yeah, like we were in the process. We were improving our situations. We were gaining more education. We were even changing where we were living.
But not in white neighborhoods.
Well, can you really have a white neighborhood? I mean.
Wait, what do you mean?
I mean,
I'm sorry. Here, let me explain. The government
because you can't have a legal process that makes a white neighborhood, right? That would be illegal.
No. You can, and they did. That's exactly the point. The federal government, through its FHA loans, literally said specifically, one, they were subsidizing communities and building these communities, and the federal government was ensuring loans for people to be able to buy homes, and specifically within those things, they were specifically saying you cannot sell your home to a Black person. This was our federal government. So then, yes, the government was specifically discriminating against the United States, against Black Americans. And
when did this happen?
In the 60s, late in the 60s.
And this was stopped during the Fair Housing Act, correct?
It was supposed to be stopped by the Fair Housing Act, but then they still find, as in all of these examples, whenever you create laws that say, okay, we can't do this anymore, we find different ways of continuing those practices, even though it's now quote unquote illegal. So you can say, yes, the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968, but we can still see practices today where they're doing operations and recognizing that the government, that people were still like discriminating. Hell, the reverse redlining happened from the 2008 until 2010, right? So that's literally 42 years. 32 years afterwards.
Okay, so can we go
I'm
back
sorry, 42.
to okay, can we go back to what specifically happened? So once the Fair Housing Act got passed, right, it would stand to reason that no state or no laws could exist that explicitly stated that you could write or not write loans to African Americans.
Sure, but that doesn't mean that surreptitious laws that still enacted the same practice didn't happen and weren't continued.
Okay, but now what we're trying to say is, well, even though they weren't saying they were, they still were, and they probably still were. I'm not saying they weren't. Of course, they probably were. I mean, if something happens one day and a law gets passed, I don't expect people to immediately change their behavior.
Sure,
but
no. But what about when you create brand new systems after the law is passed in order to get around it? For example, what about when after Brown versus Board of Education got created, where all of these
stay with the
okay, fine.
Stay with the Fair Housing Act.
Okay, fine. Let's stay with the Fair Housing Act. So then,
okay.
So after they passed those laws that said that, hey, you can't discriminate in this way, right? Like, then you still had systems where people, one, they would start pricing Black people out of these homes. We still didn't have access to the same economic opportunities that would permit us to live inside of these neighborhoods, right? So then, yes, you might be able to say, hey, we're going to pass these Fair Housing Acts, but then white flight is still continuing. Like the economic denial, the economic suppression of Black people still prevented the success that we would have needed in order to actually successfully integrate.
Yeah, I think economic suppression of Black people just like that just doesn't make sense. Like that, why would that even occur?
Because of racism. What do you mean?
Okay, sure. So on one hand, let's say you have Black people have a worse economic system up until it gets better, but it doesn't stop getting better. It doesn't stop getting better like right until the 1960s, until you have just essentially stagnation. And you can actually see this stagnation in home ownership rates. I'm pretty sure if you bring up a stat of home ownership rates, you'll see home ownership rates with Black people is much lower than home ownership rates in white people. Fair enough. You can see things like wealth. Like there's still a persistent wealth gap. I actually had some data on that. Yeah. So the wealth gap. Blah, 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 blah. Oh fuck. Okay. Whatever. The wealth gap. It like gets better and it gets worse. And it even like gets better, I think, until the 1990s.
Wait, no, you just showed me the graph.
Either way, wait. No. I showed you the wealth. Okay, hold on. There's another wealth gap graph that actually is more specific.
White Black per capita wealth ratio. That's what you showed me. So it didn't get like crazily better until the 90s.
Yeah, it has not achieved parity, right? Black people and white people. Okay, here's the one that I'm looking for. I can show it to you. So this is another one, right? So first off, Black people and white people are not at the same levels of income or the same level of wealth, right? That is still a persistent thing, right? And if you look at the one I showed you is more specific. It goes from 1950 to 2019, but it actually shows that it improves up until the like 1990s ish, and then it gets worse, and then it gets better, then it gets worse, and then it gets better. But it like still kind of hovers in between, like Black Americans having between 1/6 to 1/5 Americans of white people, right?
Okay.
If this is true, right, and you're a housing investor, well then you are going to not give houses to Black people you're going to give loans to Black people at a lower rate than white people, because Black people are going to have a lower amount of wealth, which means Black people have a lower level of credit worthiness, a lower level of income. So that's not necessarily you being racist. You're just being like a self-interested, rational person.
That sounds good on paper until we start looking at the studies where they're determining, which is what they ended up having to settle on, that even if you controlled for income and credit score, Black Americans with better credit scores and higher income were still given worse loans than their white counterparts. And it's racist. It is absolutely racist to, instead of looking at individuals when comparing their loans and things like that, to consider the race. If you're not looking at, because each individual loan is supposed to be given based on individual merit, to compare the whole when you're assessing a loan would obviously be racist, considering obviously we understand that we're still on the heels one generation past the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, or the Fair Housing Housing Act of 1968. So then to sit there and say we're going to compare all black people as a whole who still have largely been left out of all of these opportunities, to then say that, I mean, to look at an individual in 2010 or in 2009 and say, let's look at all black Americans, knowing that black Americans are significantly overrepresented in poverty, instead of looking at the individual, his income, his credit score, and determining what the best loan is, seems like that would be incredibly racist.
Right. It would also be incredibly weird, right? Because like,
but they did it.
So like, okay,
and we got proof.
It would also, I mean, I'd love to like look through that proof and discuss it.
But
like,
sure, I can link you.
Yeah. I mean, it would be incredibly weird because you're essentially saying there's like, okay, so you understand like every loan exists on a risk return curve, right?
I'm sorry, you said what happened?
Like every loan exists on a risk return curve.
For the most part, sure. But there were obviously all these things like, for example, the FHA loans that the government gave, which offset what the bank originally considered in its risk returns, right? Sure.
I actually have a humongous problem with FHA loans. I think Fannie Mae is awful. I think we should get rid of it. But like
that was prior to Fannie Mae, wasn't it?
No, FHA loans are given. Is it Freddie Mac that gives them? But they're government loans, right? And that exposes them to a whole host of problems.
Oh, sure. But overall, but they did exist, and we can obviously see that those loans created wealth for white Americans. Right.
Okay. Well, I highly disagree with that, but like, I just want to go back to the original thing of like why I think that is very strange. So if you're a bank, right? You like, I'm going to assume someone being given a worse loan is a higher interest rate, and what you do is you correlate the interest rate of your loan to the risk of the loan, i.e., I'm going to give this person a higher interest rate because I think there's some probability that they won't pay me back, right? You can do like you can kind of do like an expected value equivalent. So like if you have a low interest rate loan with a high probability of being paid back, that's going to give you the same rate of return as a high interest loan with a low probability of being paid back. So to say that there are banks that are like just looking at black people and giving them higher interest rates, if everything else says that they should have lower interest rates, means you have banks out there that just don't want to make money. They're so racist.
No, but
they don't want to make money.
No, but that's
right. That's because that's how finance works.
No. But okay. So then let me tell you how finance works. I mean, I'm pretty sure that you and I both know that a higher interest rate on a loan yields you more money, right?
Well, there's some issues here because
Wait. Just make sure that this part is factually accurate. All else equal, a higher interest rate on a loan means more money for the person who issued that loan, right?
Yeah, except when you put a higher interest rate, all else isn't equal, right? The person that you're giving the loan to typically is going to have a higher risk of you not paying it back.
Right. No. But what we're just talking
about, which is why you give them a higher interest rate.
Right now, specifically, what we're talking about is the perspective and potential gains of the banker, right? So don't shift this towards the burden on the individual who received the loan. We're saying from the perspective of the potential gains of the banker, the higher the interest rate that he can get on that loan, then the more profits he's making. So what it seems like you were expressing is that a banker would not want to find opportunities to give people higher interest rates as high as he can get them in order to receive the most amount of money. But what we discovered was that black Americans were specifically targeted, as has been settled, to the tune of billions and trillions of dollars, or no, not trillions, billions of dollars from all of our largest lenders in the country. They've settled to billions of dollars because they were discriminating. We can control by looking and saying, hold on, just to make sure that the studies were concluded, and I linked one to you already, by the way. I didn't link you a study. I just linked you the article detailing the settlement of these banks for specifically the practice of directly targeting black people with lower loans. Now, you might say, well, why would they do that? And obviously, I'm saying that the obvious reason was because black people didn't have the same amount of didn't have the history of buying houses, right? Home ownership within black Americans was significantly lower. So because it was a foreign process for most black Americans, that meant that they weren't fully aware of what was actually owed to them or how specifically to negotiate for these things. So then this is something that's happening on the heels of the Fair Housing Act and the racist implementation of these FHA loans. So you have a generation of people whose parents didn't own homes, who are now first buying their homes, being the first generation home buyers, who have no history, no guidance from any elder generations. And now the bank is saying these people don't know any better, which means we can get away with charging them more, like higher interest rates on their loans, or making their interest rates variable, such that now when the housing crisis happens and their interest rates skyrocket, they'll lose all of that wealth. And you were specifically
a bank can't do that. A bank can't predict a housing crisis. That's just like
no. I'm not saying that the bank predicted the housing crisis. What I'm saying is that what the bank did do was they created loans that specifically were able to be adjusted such that black people could receive, such that black people's interest rates were already higher, and they also had variable interest rates, which meant they could spike during certain seasons. And when those kinds of things happened, as they eventually did happen, then black people lost a significant amount of wealth. But what we can also say
100% I agree with this.
Okay, great. So then the key factor here is the studies controlled for the factors that are the largest determining factors for what the interest rate should be, and found that despite black people, even if we controlled for those factors, which would be income to debt ratio and credit score, that black people were largely being targeted and given lower loans. This is what happened. Now, I'm going to say that the reason that they were doing that is because they were taking advantage of the fact that they knew black people didn't have the history to know how to negotiate for their loans or what would be the appropriate amount. But what we do know is they did specifically target black people with these loans. So that's what they settled for.
I don't think that's what this is. Okay, so
we can read it.
Yeah. Okay, blah. Redlining so time to begin. So I think this is Bancorp, which is buying Cadence, spent more than $10 million in 2016 to settle accusations that it discriminated against black applicants in Memphis. Regulators said they sent undercover testers to ask about given loan and found they were treated worse than white testers with similar credit.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Yeah, they've done studies. They looked at previous loans that already existed. These things have all been proven, bro. I get. Listen.
I definitely think there's. Hold up. I definitely think there's a lot more to this, right? Because, like I said, I think it would be very weird for a bank to just be racist and change how it like makes its loans. I don't give bank one. There are a shit ton of bankers out there. We have a lot of choice with who we do banks with. So, I mean, if some bank is being racist and mispricing its loans, then another bank's going to come in and be better than that one.
This happened but that's happened with all of the largest lenders. And again, you got to be honest with yourself right now, Elliot. Like, to think about it. Right now, you're encountering information that you've never seen before, that you know nothing about, and I'm providing you with information in which the banks have literally made legal settlements over this issue, and you're saying, no, there just has to be more. Like, and you don't even know. So it's like you're dismissing something that you were completely uninformed about without having any information, and just automatically assuming that something else has to be there. That's motivated reasoning in a nutshell, buddy.
Okay, so one, this isn't a study, right? This is just a news report that you said.
Sure.
It's offering about a setup. Okay,
I can find a study for you if you need.
Yeah. I'd like. Okay, sure.
Okay,
but
let's do the study.
The other thing. Wait. Hold on. So the other thing that you pointed out is that, like, if it was the case that bankers are going to be targeting people that they think have less financial education that they could take better advantage of, I mean, that'd be something I'd be concerned with. I wouldn't necessarily call that racist. I'd call that predatory. I mean, this isn't necessarily happening because these people are black. This is happening because these people don't have proper financial education or don't have proper history.
But why don't they have that financial? Why don't they have that financial education and their proper history?
Yes, yeah.
Because they're black.
Right, yeah. I mean,
so you can't divorce the race from this situation.
It's not because they're black. It's not because they're black. It's because their ancestry.
Well, their ancestry was, but the things that targeted their ancestry was targeting them because they were black.
Right. You
can't divorce that. Then you can't say, I'm targeting you because you're black. Now I'm going to be targeting you because your progeny came from you, and I originally targeted you because you're black. But then say, now this new thing that's a target is obviously not race related.
Yeah,
that doesn't make sense.
This would be true of any group that was to have a similar situation.
But the only group that had that similar situation in this country was black.
Actually, a lot of groups have come to this country with very little education and very little.
But no.
Like financial
I'm talking
issues.
about
I mean,
no. But I'm talking about intentional
you went to like
codification of the
Appalachia,
law.
you'd find poor white people.
Right. No, I'm not saying that you can't find other people in poverty, but you'll find the poor white people weren't in that specific poverty because specifically the government directly codified racist application against them. Again, when we're talking about this when we're talking about the FHA loans that were denied to people, right? Those things were literally they had in the deed. Not that you can't be Hispanic, not that you can't be Asian, specifically that you cannot sell to black people. It was directly aimed at black people. So you can't say everyone else had the same situation. You can't say that the white people in Appalachia who are dealing with poverty, while there can be some overlap in some of their issues because of poverty, we don't have the same overlap as far as systemic targeted racial oppression. And that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Okay. So you're bouncing around, right? I mean, we're talking about like the decision of private banks, and I actually don't like predatory behavior. In fact, one of the reasons I actually don't like, it's funny, I'm a massive capitalist. I hate banks for this. And now you're going back to like the actions of the government. I completely condemn any actions of the government that were racist in nature. In fact, I say one of the things I like about the American government is that it's corrected. It ultimately self-corrected itself.
But the redlining was government. It wasn't private banks. The redlining was the government.
It was government. Yeah, it was government.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now,
that's what we've been talking about. We're talking about laws and we're talking about systemic oppression. Furthermore, and here's the thing. We can talk about systemic oppression at the private level with the banks, and we can talk about systemic oppression at the government level when it comes to the policies and the Supreme Court. Yeah, both of these things can whatever. Which one of those? I feel like so you've already agreed then that the systemic oppression happened at the legal level, and then happened. And then what we can also say, and then we can also say that then once the legal level happened, like once they got rid of that, then we saw it continue to happen at the private level. So it seems like still systemic oppression.
And that's probably what I would disagree with you on.
Well, you would disagree with the banks who settled for billions of dollars for that very practice.
Okay, so you can say that this practice had a racially unequal effect, but you can't necessarily say this practice had racial malice in its motivation. I don't really believe banks operate this way.
I don't have to argue about malice. All I have to argue about is application and what they actually targeted. I don't have to argue about I don't care about, hey, well, did they feel? None of those other things matter. What we're talking about is this was how they applied it. This is who was targeted, even if we control for all of these different things. They aimed it and targeted black people.
In fact, there are a lot of businesses that do this. Businesses target specific groups of people all the time for certain business.
Well, right now we're talking about, okay, good. So then you're saying that there are other types of oppression and discrimination, but right now what we're talking about.
Well, I don't necessarily consider it oppressive. I mean, if you're a tampon company, you settle women, that's not oppressive because you specifically
those
targeted
other cases
women,
might not necessarily be racial oppression, but right now what we're talking about is racial oppression, and that racial oppression of that specifically targeting black people was specifically something that happened. So then you can make analogies, and maybe the other analogies will fall off at the racial component, but the race is an essential component for the specific targeting of this reverse redlining by these private banks, which is why they've settled for billions of dollars.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, like I said, they only did this because it was in their minds good banking. It was a profitable thing. They weren't necessarily motivated to oppress black people, right? I think it's very. Yeah. Okay.
I'm not saying that they were motivated. I'm not saying that they intended.
Yes. But a lot of discrimination in and of itself isn't necessarily ethically wrong. I mean, if you had a sunscreen company,
discrimination.
If you have a sunscreen company, they're probably not going to selling to black people. Is that discrimination, right? Are we going to? And this is a problem. You can't say like companies specifically targeting groups of people is discrimination. In fact, nor can you really even say that companies that have negative effects to other people are discrimination or even immoral, right? We can talk about the situations where those negative effects come from, and we can build policy to try to not prevent that, right? Okay. Which is what I would love to do.
So look at the definition of discrimination.
But you say, okay,
The definition of discrimination.
Oh no, we can't do definitions. Dictionaries are descriptive, not prescriptive.
Right, but you just said that we can't call it, and saying that we can't identify it as, but we can exactly, because you're right. They are descriptive, and we're trying to describe this practice, and you're saying that we can't describe it or we cannot label it as discrimination, where we have something that's intention is to describe phenomena or describe words or describe situations, and the definition for it is literally descriptive, so we can call it according to its description. Which the authority of the description is a dictionary.
I know, but like, it's right, which means you just committed an appeal to authority.
No.
Are we going to entrust society of the writing of dictionaries now?
No. I'm going to be trusting the words that we are using to the authority, which is the dictionary. That is an appeal to authority. That I don't subscribe to proprietary definitions. You're right. So in that case, yes, the dictionaries are the authority when it comes to what words mean. And so if we're having a conversation using the English language, then we need to find out what the words mean, especially if you want to challenge the usage of the word discrimination, then we need to look up the word discrimination to find out if it applies.
Yeah. Are we going to let the writers of dictionary control?
If you said we can't use the word discrimination, then tell me, what does discrimination mean to you?
I mean, there definitely is an intentional component to it.
Not necessarily. Right?
There definitely is a motivational component to it. There definitely is a assigning of these people that have what I would say is irrational hatred or some irrational prejudice to like a group of people that's going to judge their actions or going to control their actions. And I think that's probably why I have a lot more faith in private industries and in robust competitive capital markets. Not crony capitalism, not like exploitative private industries, not like those I fucking hate. But like, I think when groups of people are motivated for their primary self-interest, I find it very difficult to believe that they would want to discriminate just because. Now, I definitely think there are a lot of things that, we see in our society that result in unequal outcomes, right? And you're seeing that here, where a bank saw that black people were uneducated and had a poor financial history and targeted that people because of that. Yes, that sucked, right? I'd actually probably say that the fact that this bank got sued and lost several banks got sued. I mean, that's almost kind of like the system working, right? I mean, I don't even know how that's possible, but sure. I mean, I think if you can do that, I think that's kind of a good thing, right?
But the system, you can say that the system worked, but that system worked after the damage had already been done, after the large amounts of black wealth was wiped out in the housing crisis. So yes, you can say that the system did eventually work and that it sued these whatever, but all those lawsuits, those billions of dollars from all of these large banks didn't go back to the consumers. It's not like black people who had lost that wealth were then given back their property or whatever. So in that sense, then, yeah, so you can, I guess, agree with me then that discrimination was happening.
I mean, yes, but that was discrimination that happened and was certainly bad, right? And although I will point out, I mean, the fact that it took essentially a civil lawsuit to correct this, I mean, kind of shows that one of my theses that the legal system is inefficient. I'm not saying this is something I strongly stick to.
Okay, we'll disagree about whether or not the legal system is necessarily inefficient, but
I definitely think you think it's a lot more efficient than I think it is.
Okay, sure,
but I'm getting that feeling.
For sure, maybe, possibly. But to be honest with you, I don't really have a lot of thoughts on that because I don't think that it's a necessary component when we're evaluating whether or not systemic oppression has happened, whether or not the law has been applied equally, and whether or not the state of black Americans today is based on those legal applications.
I mean, so I kind of want to get to the crux of what I think we disagree with, which is the prescription, right?
Oh yeah, right. Reparations. That's the top. That is exactly right. That's what we said we would be talking about.
Because it's like 9:30. Okay,
sure.
So I have I have a lot of problems with reparations. I don't know. Do you want to go first, though? I'm curious why. I can kind of see your whole thesis that you've constructed.
I'm pretty sure, because from the argumentation, it becomes pretty obvious, right? Because I think it actually just flows downstream logically. But sure, to say it pretty succinctly, I would say that obviously when it comes to this country, that we obviously have had a system that says that when we have done some wrong, reparations is one, a great signal to show that we are righting that wrong. And two, if we're looking for everyone to be able to be treated equally under the Constitution, then at that point to be able to say that we've done this wrong and we're not going to do any steps to fix it, then that means we're going to end up creating second-class citizenship. We obviously know that what do they say? An object in motion remains in motion unless it interacts with a
third,
thing of equal and opposite force. So if that's the case,
third law of physics.
there you go. So then if that's the case, then that means if the government did act in a way which would send black people in a downward spiral through its systemic racism, right, through its laws, through its practices, and the application of those laws and practices, then that means now that unless we do something to fix this issue, then black people will continue to do that. Now, this isn't a statement about any individuals. This is a statement about the collective. Whenever you're looking at these kind of things, you're talking about normative claims, normative outcomes, as opposed to individuals. I do believe that this is the greatest country in the world in the sense that as an individual, you do have opportunity. You can fight harder, work twice as hard to receive certain levels of success, as I've seen in myself and my family. But that doesn't mean that the average person isn't going to be doing that. So then obviously, then we should say normatively, this will not be the outcome. So unless the government does something to step in and act to right its wrong, then you will have forever a group of disenfranchised people who despise the government because of the racism that has impacted their parents and which is largely contributing to the state of them as a collective. So since the government has already established precedent that when it has done egregious things, that it should rectify those things via reparations, I can't see any valid reason why they wouldn't continue the exact same practice for their black American citizens who have been done the worst, or at least one of the worst. We don't have to do any comparisons to any other oppressed groups who have been done exceedingly horrible. That's why I think we need reparations.
Okay. I mean, I can see a lot of that. I can see how. Okay, so in a weird sense, I probably agree with some things. I definitely think something should be done. I definitely think the economic state of Black America right now is abysmal. I think the fact that it hasn't changed since the 60s is a disgrace. I think as someone that, says I pride myself on that we have this country, that we have these opportunities. I pride myself in, I love entrepreneurships. I'm an investor. I love people. I love all that shit, right? And the fact that this thesis hasn't helped Black people, I think, is really sad. Probably I think probably the biggest disagreement I have comes from some of the things that I've learned about how people build wealth, and I just don't think that being given money causes people to flourish. I think that wealth building comes from a shift in your belief system, a shift in your behavior, and a shift in your value system. You see this a lot, for example, in the people that often become millionaires. There have been several books written by this. One of them is, I think it's called the Millionaire Next Door, and you essentially find that what causes people to build wealth? Well, it's you have a good work ethic and you are very smart with your money. The thing that you told me about these banks targeting people with poor financial literacy shows that we definitely have a literacy gap. If you were to come and tell me that we were going to do some government programs that could improve Black literacy, I might be game for that, right? I think some of the things that President Trump actually was doing, where he was trying to establish opportunity zones in Black neighborhoods, yeah, sure. I think that's wonderful. Those didn't actually work very well, but I think so. Like stuff like that is reasonable to me. But just like, I don't know, taxing everybody and giving all Black people like $100,000 or $500,000, that just seems kind of, I don't know, there just doesn't seem to be evidence that would help greater than the hurt it created, even though I think that there is hurt.
So here's what I would say. Look, I think when you start talking about reparations, if you're talking about only cash, I don't think that it would effectively fix the problem. Only direct cash payments. I think you would need other things, right? Obviously, there are several things that equal like financial mobility, right? One of those things, one of the most obvious ones, as we can see historically for white Americans, has been real estate, like home ownership. It greatly impacts literally how like significant amounts of your culture. It obviously impacts what schools you go to, and it impacts just all sorts of different like cultural things, right? So then I would say home ownership is obviously important, and I would say that would be a vital, necessary step in any reparations plan if we want it to be effective in closing the racial wealth gap. Secondly, I would say education, as you also mentioned. It seems like we're in agreement there. Financial literacy, as well as just standard education improvements, would be obviously effective at like helping Black people to do better. And I think education is an obvious portion of the reparations that we would need, both for financial literacy and, again, standard education, because people with education have better incomes, right? So then if that's the case, then we should need better education, better student loan forgiveness and student loan forgiveness and free education and in the forms of reparations, as well as mortgage forgiveness and free and interest-free loans as had been given to white people. And I would say that those things would greatly impact the economic mobility. And then also, I totally agree with you about entrepreneurship. So I would say that within this reparations plan, you should also include government assistance or government loans, low interest or interest-free loans towards Black businesses to help them establish those things. And I don't think anyone can disagree with me that a person being given access or given education and given access to to business loans and given access to home ownership, that wouldn't immediately drastically change the status of all of those individuals.
Oh, so much to unpack. Okay, can I have the Dave Ramsey conversation? Can I go there first?
I mean, whichever. I don't.
Can we talk about?
Hold on. As long as it's directly related to everything that I just laid out to you, because you asked me. To
Oh yeah, it's very much directly read.
Okay, go ahead.
No. Okay, let's talk about debt, home ownership, and how housing helps build you wealth. Do you remember the piece of data that I showed you? That I asked you to look up when we first met?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, it is the Case-Shiller 20 City Home Price Index. Okay. I found it. This is from the Wikipedia page involving this guy. I forgot who Case was, but it was done by Case and Robert Shiller. Robert Shiller is one of my favorite economists. Kind of a funny guy. And it shows you what home prices have been since 1880. Right now, if you do some math on this, you'll find that year on year, home prices have only increased about 1.5% above inflation. Now, there are a lot of other investments you can look at, like, for example, equities, for example, like the S&P 500. You even look at rental real estate or starting a business. Even like certain types of bonds, like long-term bonds, right? They all have like rates of return higher than 1.5%. So like, yeah, it's like being in a house is a good thing. Houses are terrible investments. And I think saying that being in a house causes people to grow wealth, that is true, but it's true under certain assumptions. A big assumption, I think, is that house is in a large portion of your net worth, that house is in an area that can allow you to that's close to job opportunities. It's in a community that loves you. It's close to good schools and stuff. And also, it's a good house that's quality that won't cause like a bunch of issues. So I don't want to defer to like just give people homes. I think trying to craft policy where we can have people to have better access to homes, I think is very good. That's why I'm very passionate about zoning. I'm actually very passionate about increasing our building of high density houses that are more easier to afford. And but I think just giving people houses or getting people into houses without any thought of like the greater issue of houses is kind of a big issue.
Well, but I did think about those things. That's why I mentioned all of those things concomitantly. And furthermore, I want to point out that if you have an interest-free loan on a house, right? Because housing is literally the largest expense for almost all Americans in this country. For the vast majority of Americans in this country, housing is the greatest expense. So if you turn what is people's greatest expense into now what is an immediate investment and savings because of an interest-free loan, then at that point now you're just immediately creating wealth immediately. Because that means that literally every I'm sorry, maybe you didn't hear me. I'm just going to make sure that it's crystal clear because you're reacting and it shows that you must not be paying attention. Because I'm going to say it one more time. With an interest-free loan, then that means every house payment that you make into that mortgage immediately becomes equity. Right. So if I have a $200,000 loan with that is interest free and my house is valued at $200,000, every single payment I make towards that immediately becomes equity. So if I play $1,000 on the house, then $1,000 on that loan, then that means now the loan is worth $199,000 and the house still remains at $200,000. So that's $1,000 in equity. So every payment that you make in an interest-free loan immediately becomes equity in the house, assuming that the value of the house doesn't go down. So then if that's the case, then that means great. So then you're immediately creating both a savings, both access to capital, and you're creating like wealth, right? So all of those things are immediately.
Are people responsible for the maintenance and taxes on the house?
What's happening here, man? Come on. You're literally just grasping to try to find something to dismiss what is an obvious thing for the vast majority of Americans.
It's quite important, because
this is so disingenuous. Bro, come on.
No, this is okay. So, the cost of a house is not the mortgage payment; it's actually the fixed cost of the house, which you pay regardless of you having a loan on it.
I feel like that's why really dishonest right here, bro. Like,
no, it's true. It's true because so let's say you have $200,000 in a house, like you own a $200,000 house, right?
Okay,
you're actually being charged approximately 5% of that $200,000.
In what?
So there are a couple things. So the first thing is taxes. So you're going to be paying taxes unless you want to exempt Black people from taxes. You're paying maintenance and upkeep, right? So so both those things come out to be about 1%. And then the one thing people don't get is you're paying the cost of capital. So the cost of capital is the opportunity cost you're paying. What you could also do with that $200,000. You could take that $200,000, put it in the S&P 500. Now your house, like I said, is going to increase about 1.5% above inflation. The S&P 500 is probably going to increase about 6.5%. So you have like a delta of like.
That's simply not true. So the S&P 500...
It's 100% true. I can give you data for it right now.
You don't have to give me the data because I have the numbers off the top of my head. The S&P 500 averages 12.5% over a 20-year period, whereas the freaking... In California, the maturation rate of the value of people's homes is literally about 12.5%. So I guess in those two cases, those things would be equal. Right? In the state of California?
So the 20%
wait, hold on. It feels to me like what you're about to do right now is you're going to just ignore what I just said and just start talking about a talking point that you already had. So please interact with what I just said. The S&P 500, let's establish both of those 2 points that I made. Number one, the S&P 500 over a 20-year period averages 12.5%. Yes?
No, that's actually completely wrong. If you're looking at the past 20 years, that's true. If you do something like a Monte Carlo study,
what else are we looking at?
You don't make investment decisions based off specific periods of time.
What 20
certain things that happen during the past
time? It's literally this. If we look over,
which would be a Monte Carlo simulation.
If we look over 60 years, it's still 12.5%.
No, it's not. It's closer to 9.5%.
Let me Google.
Okie doke.
Okay, here. Then okay, I got you. Then let's take your number. So then if the S&P 500 averages 9.5%, and that's the number that you would like to go to, yet the California housing market matures at 12.5%, then that means that you would actually be getting more from investing into a home in the state of California, right?
No, because you're specifically looking at the California housing market probably within the past 10 years or so, right?
No, this is. Oh, I don't know what to do, buddy. Yeah. So, if you want, I feel like at this point, my patience is getting there, and I don't want to. I think this has been a good conversation.
What are you looking at? What are you looking at? Okay, so is it 20 years or what time period are we talking about?
Let me finish this. I'm saying that at this point, I can tell where my frustration is starting to set in, and I don't want this to become an ugly conversation. And I feel like you've been pretty respectful thus far in the conversation. And as you've pointed out, it's gone for like almost 2 hours. I feel like we should reconvene at another time, and we can specifically just talk about reparations, specifically when it comes to housing, education, and direct payments. So there's 4 things: housing, education, direct payments, and business investments by our government. We can just go over those 4 things and we can prepare for it. And then that way I'll have actual numbers to argue with you. So then that way we don't have to go into circles, because I'm going to get I can tell I'm going to get frustrated right now already.
Okay. Oakley dokley.
And I appreciate you. How do you feel about this conversation overall?
I mean, it was pretty fun. It was actually interesting. We probably agreed on a lot of stuff.
Sure, I think so.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I think we disagreed on some other stuff.
Sure.
I think it gave me some stuff. I actually really do want to look at. I want to go. I want to look at. I think you really got me on the loan approval rates, because one of the assumptions I made is those studies for loan approval rates could completely be explained by credit scores. So if I could see a study, credit scores are based off income.
No, they're not. You can have.
Yeah, they are.
You can. The only three things.
It's like one of like 15 or something factors.
No. There's 6. The things that affect your credit score are on-time payments. What is it? On-time payments, debt ratios.
Debt to income.
Right. No, not debt to income ratios. Just like for example, on your credit, it's your limit to current outage, whatever. I can't think of the words right now. But
your outstanding debt limit, your outstanding debts.
Like those things. Yeah. Then it's going to be based on hard inquiries, right? Then it's going to be based on total accounts. And then there's 2 more factors, none of which are income. A person can be flat broke with 0 income, and they can still have an 820 credit score. I know I've manipulated the system myself, such that I just recently bought a car, so I have 5 hard inquiries on my credit, so my credit score is like 760. Prior to buying buying that car, my credit score was in the 800s. It has nothing to do with your income,
which I'd argue is a humongous problem.
I mean, that's your opinion, but okay. But I'm just saying
that is my.
Income has nothing to do with credit score, nor what income does have something to do with like your loan approvals. Loans are basically literally based on debt to income ratio, based off of your income and your credit score. Those are the only 3 factors that are determining of your loan: debt to income ratio, credit score, and your and your income. That's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, one of the problems is we don't know because they don't actually tell us because they change it all. Anyway, I have actually humongous beef. Care to guess my credit score? It's actually the best credit score in my opinion.
Were you going to say 0 because you don't lose credit at all? Dave Ramsey?
Yeah, I don't use credit. I'm Dave Ramsey. I'm super Dave Ramsey fan, man.
I'm a huge Dave Ramsey fan too. I think he gets a lot of things wrong, obviously, and I think I think he gets a lot of things wrong, but overall, I totally agree with like the vast majority of his standpoints, and I absolutely believe in like not being heavy in debt and things like that, and eliminating debt for the most things. Obviously, you can't afford to eliminate debt for homes for most people, considering the income of most Americans. But I agree with that. I agree with most of his stuff. Yeah, I agree with most of his things. Yeah.
Have you looked into Anthony O'Neill out of curiosity?
No.
That's not, okay. So so Dave Ramsey has had 2 prominent Black personality, essentially people that worked for him and kind of just did the same thing that he does. One of them was Chris Hogan. Oh man, it's funny. I loved Chris Hogan. Chris Hogan had this big booming voice. He was so motivating. His advice wasn't good, but he was wonderful to listen to. Then he got into a sexual harassment scandal, and then like they fired him. And not only did they fire him, they like erased him. So you like can't find anything he's ever done. But the other one was this guy called Anthony O'Neill who it's funny, Anthony O'Neill that became their top host that wasn't Dave Ramsey. He got so big that he now kind of like does his own things. And he's actually talked a lot about Black issues, but he decided to not talk to us about money. He also like talks about like relationships and like religion and stuff. So he's a pretty interesting guy. I probably think similarly to him though. So he probably would disagree with you on reparations, but he's one of my favorite people.
I don't feel like people genuinely disagree on reparations unless they're intentionally informed or being deceptive. I don't think it's actually a realistic thing you can do logically.
Yeah, but we should probably talk about that more next time.
Hey, genuinely, bro, I think you are. I appreciate you just again for having the conversation. Obviously, I can get a little bit passionate at times, and I feel like you were kind of rolling with it, and kind of calling to order every now and then. So I sincerely appreciate that, bro.
Sure, me too. All right, I'll go now.
Wait, really quick. That's the other ones, right? So the 6 factors are payment history, credit card use, which is like the ratio that you've used, derogatory marks. I forgot about that one. The age, your credit history. Those are the 2 that I left out. Derogatory marks and credit history. Those are the 6 factors, and literally those are the only 6 factors.
Yeah, that's
income is not one of them though.
Is it? It's not debt to income.
No, no, no.
That would still make it income.
No. It's not debt to income. It's just your credit card
Oh.
usage, right? Which is not has nothing to do with your income. Derogatory marks don't have anything to do with your income. Hard inquiries have literally nothing to do with your income. Total accounts total has nothing to do with your income, and obviously your payment history doesn't have to do with your income. So if you can have like literally like you can have a credit card that has a $2,000 limit, not use that credit card whatsoever during that entire month, and then it's just going to stay at zero, and then your payment history is going to stay at 100%, and you'll just continue to grow.
Yeah, which. I mean, all that is dependent on income, though, because your income determines all of this. But yeah, that's really.
Well, no, you just don't have to use the credit card, and then your income doesn't matter. Like
I know, but it's like
person with good credit. A person with good credit can
related.
lose all of their income, and their credit score will not drop.
Okay, can I leave you with the thing that Dave Ramsey once said that I thought was just so fascinating?
Absolutely.
He said, okay, so because he doesn't have a credit card, right? Mm-hmm. He could go down to like one of those apartments and they would deny him an apartment because he doesn't have a credit score, right? Sure. Mm-hmm. But he could buy the apartment.
Sure. That's where my main disagreement with Dave Ramsey is. His mentality is based.
It just shows you how dumb it is.
I think that's dumb. But look, bro, I love you. Do you have any socials or any way that people can follow you?
I mean, I'm on Twitch at Elliot She Miller. If you search Elliot the Lancer, I'm all over.
Link that.
I'm not really that big in social media. All I ever do is be a little shit on social media. So,
okay,
but
Elliot.
You can follow me on Twitter.
Okay, Elliot the Lancer. That's your Twitter?
No. My Twitter here. I'll send you my Twitter.
Okay, and link your stream too, and I'll provide those in the description.
I don't have it. I mean, I do have a Twitch stream. It's just personal. It's secret. That's probably the social media. The social I'm most active on is Elliot She Miller.
Okay, listen, it was great talking to you, Elliot. I appreciate the conversation. We'll do some studying, and maybe I'll have some studies for you in the future. And okay. I'll find some actual studies on reverse redlining that like I can really like stand by that I will give to you so you can kind of learn about that whole situation. Okay.
Okay.
All right, man. Peace out.
Peace out.
All right. Listen. Y'all, that was a pretty decent conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Listen, I really am a huge fan of Dave Ramsey. I am a very huge fan of Dave Ramsey. The only thing that really bothers me about him is some of the loss of practicality for some of the things that he's suggesting, right? Because his ability to be 100% debt-free and things like that probably has to do with his amount of wealth, right? When you're trying to build the wealth, I understand the idea of limiting income. I'm limiting debt, limiting interest, limiting, credit. I totally get that. But when you're trying to buy a house, or when you're trying to buy a house, if you don't have a lot of wealth, you're probably going to need a little bit of debt there. When you're trying to buy a car, if you don't have a lot of wealth, you're probably going to need a little bit of debt there. Now, do I think you need to buy an exceedingly expensive car? Probably not. Just something within your means. Used cars are, I think, pretty freaking amazing because a car is not an investment. Well, it can be an investment, but it is not a financial vehicle, right? In a sense of like, this is what's going to help me generate wealth, right? But it is an investment. For example, there's lots of opportunities that I've gotten simply because I have a car, right? I remember when I first started getting money and building credit and all of those things. And I remember talking about lifestyle creep. One of the things that was part of lifestyle creep for me was a car. Prior to that, I didn't have a car. So whenever I wanted to get around, I just paid some of my buddies like gas money and they would drive me wherever the freak I needed to go. Everything was fine. But then there were times where they didn't want to, and it really kind of sucked to have to like ask them in advance. And sometimes things would come up like last minute and I needed to just be able to get up and go. So I realized that that was a thing, that was a new expense that I had when I started making money because I had to work these jobs and that meant I needed to get to those jobs. So I invested in the car so that it gave me the ability to get to these events and things like that. So it's an investment in that degree, but it's not like a financial investment, right? And in the same sense, there were other expenses like buying suits and dress clothes, right? For some of the gigs that I needed those clothes. If I didn't have those clothes, I couldn't work those gigs. So then it was like, yes, as long as the benefits of these expenses were greater than the total cost of those benefits, then that meant that they were actually investments and they were worthwhile, right? And so in the same sense, I would say that sometimes for people who don't have the wealth that they can just fall back on to be able to buy whatever the thing is, then at that point, then you're probably going to need credit, right? If you're looking for an apartment complex because we all have to live, and you're saying, I don't have the wealth to buy the apartment, then I probably need a decent credit score so as to be able to get in the apartment. Fortunately, you do not have to go in debt in order to increase your credit score. You can get a very, very high credit score without a penny in debt. So all you need to do is just work on your credit score. And I could have a whole video on talking about credit score if we wanted to, because I hacked the freak out of that system. And I went from 290 to 750 in about 2.5 years. So it's very easy to manipulate the credit system, especially once you know what the factors of credit are and how you can manipulate it. So I like Dave Ramsey. He has a lot of amazing advice, but a lot of his advice is out of touch with what would be able to apply to like the average American. I love y'all for being in the chat. I would like to hear some of you guys' thoughts. If you guys think what the areas for me to improve on the debate, all of those kinds of things. And for the YouTube folks, leave those kind of comments in the whatever. I do read all of my comments. I hope that the channel doesn't get too big that I can't keep up, but I read right now all of my comments. So leave me comments telling me how I can improve, what you guys would like to see more of, areas where you think my argumentation is weak, whatever, anything. I like all of that kind of feedback. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff.